They were hard-edged, soft-centered, brutally demanding, and easily pleased. And I think it's such a beautiful way of holding all the complexities of what it means to be obviously a Black woman in the U.S., but also just like not a white person in the United States.
What up? It's Dramos, and this is the recap. Of course, as I do each and every week, breaking down some of the biggest headlines from this last week. My guest hopping on in just a little bit. She is an author and founder of Latina Rebels, Prisca Dorcas Mojica Rodriguez. She'll be hopping on in just a little bit to help me break down some of these headlines. Before that, though, let's get into some of the BS from this last week. Now, listen, on the brighter side of things, I'm actually not getting into any BS at all right now. It's going to be all positivity starting off the show for a change. And that is because this last week was the kickoff to Hispanic Heritage Month, or for some, Latinx Heritage Month, depending on your feelings about the term Hispanic. Now, many will argue that the term Hispanic is something given to us by our oppressors, and they have a point there, but that's a topic for another time. Today is all about celebrations. And I actually came across this list that was put together by endeavors.com. And they were giving us some facts that we probably don't know about Hispanic Heritage Month. And I thought it was a perfect way to kind of kick things off for us. Now, let me address the elephant in the room to start. And that would be, why the hell does Hispanic Heritage Month start in the middle of a month? It has never made sense to me. I've seen people on social media talking about this. Does not make sense to anyone. But I do have an answer for you. There actually is a reason. And I learned about it reading and doing some research. Now, in 1968, President Lyndon Johnson signed off on Hispanic Heritage Week, which was then expanded to a month by President Reagan in 1988. Now, when it started, it did start on September 15th. And the reason for that being, it was actually the anniversary of independence for Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. And Mexican's Independence Day actually just comes one day later on September 16th. And then Chile falls on September 18th. So there actually is a reason behind our Hispanic Heritage Month starting in the middle of a month. All right, now that we got the whole date thing out of the way, we got that confusion, cleared up. Let's get into one of the other age-old arguments, and that is the terms Hispanic versus the term Latino. Now, the term Hispanic refers to people who speak Spanish and or are descended from Spanish-speaking populations. This is contrasted by Latino or Latina, Latinx, depending on what you identify as, which refers to people who are descended from Latin America. Now, this is more geographical, that the term Latino, that is, and it actually also includes people from Central America, South America, and the Caribbean, but includes places like Brazil, where the national language is actually not Spanish, but Portuguese, and actually excludes places like Spain, even though they speak Spanish. I hope that wasn't as confusing for you to hear from me as it was for me when I was doing my research on all of this. Hopefully that cleared things up. Now, on some more positivity when it comes to our culture, let's get to some facts here. Now, let me tell you some history that the racist in this country, they're not going to want to hear. So many pieces of standard American culture were actually imported from south of the border. Oh my goodness, so shocking. Yes, the very people that they want to build a wall around actually are responsible for much of the culture that is celebrated in places like the South. Texas, I am looking at you. Now listen, for example, we're talking about the cowboy hat, rodeos, and ranching, which are all from Spain and Mexico. And several states, surprise, surprise, actually have names that are derived from Spanish words like Montana, Colorado, and Nevada. Oh my goodness. Wow. Shocker, right? Shocker. We've been contributing to the culture of America as much as they don't want us to be a part of it. Now listen, get this one as well, because the South loves to claim responsibility for this, but barbecue actually originated from the intersection of Spanish and Caribbean traditions. The word barbecue actually comes from the Taino Indians, and they are responsible for the first ever cooking grill in Puerto Rico. Yes, that's right. You're welcome, world. Now, if you wanted some more proof that we are ingrained in the very fabric of this country, according to the Minority Veterans Report by the Department of Veteran Affairs, over 1.2 million vets in the United States are of Hispanic or Latino descent. Yes, that is right. However, the military sacrifice and service of Hispanic Americans actually stretches all the way back to the Revolutionary War. Yes, the very inception of this country. Shocker. My goodness. And now, historically, Hispanic soldiers have actually fought in every single war, both on and off of American soil. And lastly, people, I was celebrating when these census numbers came out, but we have some numbers in this country. We are coming out here heavy. So according to the U.S. Census Bureau, Hispanic Americans number over 60 million and represent over 18% of this country's population. That's right. Suck it, white supremacists. Now, basically, what I'm trying to say with all of this is that we should be very loud. It is our month. We have an incredible culture that deserves to be celebrated. And regardless of how much they try to deny or flat out erase our history, it can never change the contributions our people have made to this country and even the world. Whew. I'm feeling good after speaking this out here right now out loud and letting y'all feel this energy. I hope you're feeling this energy at home right now as we start off Hispanic Heritage Month, Latinx Heritage Month, whatever you want to call it. We out here doing our thing. And let's keep them good vibes rolling with my guest this week. She is the founder of Latina Rebels and also the author of the new book for brown girls with sharp edges and tender hearts. Prisca Dorcas Mojica Rodriguez. How we feeling? Did I get that right?
No, yeah, you get it all right. Thank you.
Okay, good. That's a lot, but I love that you're unapologetically not trimming that down for anybody, I have to say, just to get things started.
Yeah, it's all on purpose.
Right, which I appreciate. So, I mean, listen, I want to talk about the book because I feel like I've been seeing it pop up everywhere, even in my own personal life with my girlfriend. And she's so excited that when she found out I was interviewing you. But before we dive into that, I want to kind of get your take on a few current events that I kind of feel like might touch on certain themes that you also talk about in the book.
I'm down.
All right, cool. So, I mean, let's start out with the obvious. I mean, this last week we kicked off Hispanic Heritage Month or Latinx Heritage Month, depending on what you're kind of subscribing to. Obviously, there is a bit of a debate that happens when it comes to the terminology. I'm just curious overall. I mean, for starters, what are your thoughts on like the term Hispanic versus Latino and Latinx and all that's included in that?
I've always hated Hispanic. I've always been Hispanic. Like, right. I've always fallen in that category, but sure. I have always hated it. I was raised in Miami, which is like mostly Latinx city.
Sure.
And nobody called themselves Hispanic. You were right. Colombiano, Nicaragüense, Cuban. Nobody was like, I'm Hispanic. Like, that's a very, right. I feel like that centers white people a lot. Like, it's just easier to put us all there.
Right. Well, I mean, that's like the argument. It's like the name that was given to us by our oppressors almost,
Yeah. I like Latinx, though, a lot.
Okay, so you do like that. That is kind of like also the thing where people are just like, oh, these damn millennials are trying to like change things now. So, I mean, you are okay with that?
Yeah, I think it's... Okay. Can I curse?
Do your thing.
Okay. I think it's that people are putting that on millennials.
Right.
Because I started using the @ sign, the arroba, probably in 2012. And then 2014, I went to El Salvador. And I met a bunch of trans and feminist activists.
Sure.
And they're the ones who were like, we don't like the arroba because in the arroba, the O dominates the A still. Like, that visually we don't like. Like, sure. We still are prioritizing the O, the gendered, the male O. And as soon as they said it, I felt like that emoji with the
head exploding.
Yeah. I was just sitting there like, yes.
Right.
And it immediately hit. Like, I didn't learn the X or the E in academia. I learned it by trans and feminist activists in El Salvador who were using the E or the X.
Right.
So I was like, the argument that this is an academic thing, that this is a U.S. thing, it has nothing to do with
Right. I agree 100%. And I think it's obvious that like in a male dominated world historically that there would be so much pushback to this. But I think people are failing to realize we're trying to kind of correct some of the mistakes of our culture's past, unfortunately, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So let's kind of another kind of controversial thing, and I use air quotes with that, but this was last week we saw the MTV VMAs, and their award for Best Latin Song was won by Billie Eilish, who is obviously a white woman, and then was her song with Rosalia, who is of Spanish descent. Yeah, she's from Spain. Yeah. And there was a lot of backlash on the internet about two people who are essentially not Latin winning the Latin award. So I'm curious now your take when you hear that.
Oh, it's so predictably it, though. I mean, I feel like Latinx primed this situation.
Sure.
Go to Telemundo, Univision, who are our anchors? They're mostly blonde.
Right,
or they dye their hair blonde.
Right.
Light skin. Like even Sofia Vergara. Like she was a hit. We knew her in our community. She was in telenovelas. Blonde bombshell. She came to the U.S. to become more palatable to what Americans think is Latinas. They made her a brunette.
Right.
But we primed this. We have been taught to overvalue whiteness to such an extent that we gave white people the permission to then turn around and give this award to some white people.
Right. I mean, it's definitely tone deaf. It's obvious that there weren't probably any brown people in the room when this was being decided. But I do have to say, I kind of feel like there is this weird gray area, though, for people from Spain, right, who speak Spanish, and especially when you're talking about artists who are making music in their native tongue, which is Spanish. They're going to end up kind of crossing paths with Latin America, you know, and the diaspora, obviously. So, I mean, do you kind of feel like they should be kind of kept out of this conversation, though, with that in mind?
Yeah, they're European. No, stay in the white. Like, you might speak Spanish.
Right.
That doesn't, no.
Right.
Like, that doesn't give you entrance. That's not it. You're still a white person. Like, I don't understand.
I mean, that definitely is true. But I think what I'm getting at, there is a bit of a complicated history, especially if you're talking about like Puerto Rico, right? Where you have our national, I'm Puerto Rican, so my background would be inevitably part Spain and also indigenous with Taino Indians and whatever else is in there, with whether it's African blood and everything else. We're kind of a mix, but a part of our culture is that of Spain, of European. So I guess it's kind of confusing at times where we all sort of fit in as well.
No, yeah. I think it's a different conversation when you're a colonized person who happens to have colonizer in you.
Sure.
Versus full-fledged colonizer.
Right.
Like, there's just a difference. And we have to distinguish, because they made that distinction for us and against us time and time and time and time again. It has, then if we insist on this script that you have given us, which has then scripted the ways that we move in the world, the ways that our proximity to like wealth and generational wealth, our proximity to opportunities, our ability to get jobs, because people don't want to hire someone with a Spanish accent.
Sure.
They want to hire someone with a European accent. That's sexy.
Right. So that's
when
intelligent, right? That comes across as intelligent rather than like subservient.
Exactly. So when they've created these ways to lock us out, the least we can do is not let them into our spaces, because they made us create our own spaces. They isolated us and forced us to create community with each other.
Yeah. That's
you
true.
don't get access to it.
I think that's a great point. I've actually never really heard it worded so clearly. You know what I mean? Because a lot of these are kind of newer conversations as far as like our mainstream culture is talking about, you know, or as a whole. I'm sure behind, you know, obviously for a long time, scholars have talked about it, and it's kind of written about in dark circles and books that aren't necessarily found on the shelves. But this is definitely, like, I think, new for a lot of people, and they're kind of having to relearn their identity a bit. You know, it's definitely, I mean, let's kind of get into the book a little bit. I think that's a great transition point, because I think you talk about kind of having to do your own research to kind of get in touch with your culture, and kind of finding a lot of these books that weren't readily available to us growing up. So, I mean, let's talk about first kind of the inspiration that you had that to take that journey into really diving into your culture and your history?
Yeah, I was the person who my parents didn't like me to do anything that wasn't Christian related. Even like music, I wasn't allowed. Like I called anything that wasn't Christian is called secular music, and still to this day, like I'll say like, "Oh, that's secular music," and people who didn't grow up in church will look at me like, "What?"
Right.
It's hip hop, bitch. Like, what are you even talking about?
Right.
But like, only when you grow up in that context do you understand that it's just Christian or secular, of God, of the devil. Right.
And there's no in between. Yeah.
No. And books too. My parents, like, I loved reading, and they would just buy me Christian books all the time. I read the Bible like 9 times before I was like 11. Like, wow. I was committed.
Yeah, you're in it.
Yeah. So I was insulated, and I went to undergrad. My major was English literature. So of course I read Chess the Canon, Shakespeare, Milton, like those folks. So I wasn't like edified in any of the ways that I think college should be. And then I got to grad school, and I was doing a master's of divinity, so theology. And it's a really progressive program. Like I didn't go to a seminary in like Texas, because it's a very different story when you're going to like a very liberal college that's doing a seminary. They're going to do it seminary with a twist for sure. Like where you can't write a paper where God is a he unless you explain why you made God a he. Like you have to get, not just like because the Bible said so, because there's arguments against that if you're talking to biblical scholars. Sure. So when I started getting all this counter narrative to everything I understood about the world, I was like blown away. I mean, class was constantly me being shocked that people knew things about like colorism. I remember hearing the concept colorism. Right. I don't even remember anything that the lecture was about, because I was on my laptop and I went and Googled colorism and was like, because they just dropped it. They didn't even like engage it like a thoughtful. It wasn't like the class was about colorism. It was almost like, and this explains this because of colorism. And I was like, what? Yeah. Google. Right. Oh my gosh, that explains everything. Sure. And I was having those epiphanies daily. And so I got to this point halfway through my program where I just was like, why doesn't my mom know any of this? Because I know that she wouldn't have intentionally not taught me this. It's because this wasn't available to her, because she didn't get to go to a Vanderbilt University for her master's. Like she didn't even graduate college. Right. So why is that? That feels like that's the problem. Right. Not the fact that these isms exist, but the fact that we have locked away all the tools for people to understand these isms from the people who are most impacted by it.
Right. Well, it's like it's historically our history has been either like rebuffed, changed, or completely like erased or tried to be kept from us, you know. Even like I was doing a podcast last week and just kind of reading about some of like the inventions that were done by Hispanic people or Latin people, you know, it blows your mind. And it's just like, how is this not something that is celebrated in school the same way Thomas Edison is celebrated for the light bulb, you know?
Exactly.
And you start to learn about different things about like the census and how we were all labeled as Mexican at one point in this country, you know, and you're like, oh, that makes perfect sense why Mexican was a racial slur that I heard growing up amongst white people that I went to high school with, you know? And it's just so many things that, like you're saying, your mind just begins to get blown. You're like, wow, so much of our world is based upon this history that's been kept from us, or it's been kind of changed. You know, it's just really fascinating.
And if we had access to it, our own self-perception would be drastically different. And absolutely. I think that is the strategy. Block the access so that they stay busy and unaware. And I was like, no, let's write a book where we just like give it to them all.
Which I love, because that is, I think, like the basis of why our culture has so much internal fighting, so much sort of struggle, you know what I mean? Like internal racism amongst each other. And like we have our own elitist classism system that happens within our own culture. And I think it's true what you say. It's by design. Like that's the work of our oppressors to kind of keep us fighting amongst one another, because the reality is, if you look at the census, once again, we are quickly becoming the majority in this country, and that is very scary for a lot of people. So the only way to kind of not give us that power is to suppress us in different ways like the vote, but also not allow us to teach the proper history of this world and our contributions to this world, because that would only just empower us.
Yeah. And it's a strategy to keep us separated, like keep us overvaluing whiteness. And the ones of us who aren't Black,
right,
the closer we can approximate ourselves and pretend we're just one of them, they're willing to embrace us.
Right.
So it's like, no, like all that's doing is like, we have this critical mass of us and it's breaking us up and then making all the things that we could change harder to do.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And I want to get more into some of the things in the book, but one thing that struck me that you said was talking about your parents, like why didn't they teach you and why didn't they know about this? I think also for a lot of people who are like first and second generation, our parents kind of just wanted to be able to assimilate as quickly as possible to get a better lifestyle for their family. Like I've asked my dad this before recently, being older, but like he celebrated all the traditions of Puerto Rico when he was growing up. He was born and raised there. But we never celebrated as a kid. It wasn't brought into the household,
Yeah.
So it's almost like they got caught up in almost like the rat race of trying to exist in this country and not kind of be shunned for being different almost,
Yeah. And I think it's that. I think it's also Christianity has gone in and erased and shamed a lot of cultural beliefs.
Sure.
A lot of cultural ties, a lot of different spiritual practices that have been even with colonization. Like we rejected a lot of traditions, but almost like the spiritual stuff stayed.
Right.
And like Dia de los Muertos, like that, like we fused a lot of stuff with Catholicism and we were able to maintain some of our traditions. But I think Christianity is different in the way that it shamed all of that. Like I grew up understanding that if you were Catholic, you weren't going to heaven because Catholics just went to confession and they absolved themselves. Sure. And so that wasn't a real Christian. That wasn't a true follower of God. Like I think that was a brainwashing that my parents participated in because I was like, Mommy, how come you don't do this tradition? How come you don't practice this? And she would be like, no, it's of demonios.
Right. I mean, that was a tactic even like you're talking about the Europeans were using to convert people. You know what I mean? And man, there's so much history we can dive into, but I want to get back to the book. I mean, let's quickly kind of touch on For Brown Girls with Sharp Edges and Tender Hearts. What is the actual meaning behind the title of this book?
It's a lot of things. It's my homage to the fact that I have been influenced a lot by Black scholars, Black artists. Like my parents, I couldn't listen to secular music, that story, but I could listen to jazz because my dad was a musician and jazz was real music. So I listened to Billie Holiday openly in my house. I listened to Irene Reed, Dinah Washington, Ella Fitzgerald, and those were all storytellers. Like I heard Strange Fruit. I was a junior in high school and I was rocked by Strange Fruit. I was like, what a haunting way to tell this story.
Right.
Oh my gosh. So Gloria Naylor is actually the inspiration for the cover. And it is my nod. It is me acknowledging that I am no one without all these Black scholars and Black thinkers and Black creative women specifically who have like shaped me. And so in Gloria Naylor's Women on Brewster Street, she has this quote. I read this book in grad school. She has this quote on page 5. That's how much I loved it. And she's talking about the women in this book. And she says they were hard-edged, soft-centered, brutally demanding, and easily pleased. And I think it's such a beautiful way of holding all the complexities of what it means to be obviously a Black woman in the U.S., but also just like not a white person in the United States, and specifically a woman of color.
Yeah, it's funny. You're touching on something that I can relate to because I went to school, elementary school in the Bronx, and primarily you're talking Black kids and brown kids for the most part, but mostly Black. And I had a really, really, really strong, incredible Black woman as my teacher for kindergarten and first grade. And when Black History Month came along, we really were like ingrained in learning about those things. So for me, a lot of my heroes and figures that I looked up to were a lot of Black important figures, you know, the Martin Luther Kings of the world, obviously. And it's funny that we all, I think, Latin culture, I think, without realizing, that's why we have such a close kinship to the African-American community, whether it be because we grew up, a lot of us, in the same communities, but also those are kind of the only heroes that were publicly being spoken about that we were able to see that were at least somewhat relatable to what we experienced.
Yes.
Right. Exactly.
Yes.
But once you start digging deeper, you start finding out about like the Young Lords and how they were marching right alongside the Black Panthers. But it's funny how their story is like almost never told. It's like this forgotten history once again. I mean, what do you kind of attribute to it? Because I mean, we've had plenty of revolutionary figures throughout the course of our history, you know, as Latinos, but for whatever reason, they aren't spoken about in that same light.
I think because as non-Black Latinx, we are taught to overvalue whiteness. And so we don't honor anything that's deviant. We don't honor any rebellion. We are taught, like, be like white people. White people are awesome. They pay their bills. They pay back loans on time. I've heard that growing up.
Sure. Yeah.
You want to work with white people because they do things right, quote unquote.
You want to live in a neighborhood with a lot of white people because that means it's like a nice neighborhood.
Yeah. So we have participated in our own silencing because we have been taught that being a respectable white person is the key. And so we value all those things, and we have devalued. Like when I've heard of the Young Lords, when I understood the Young Lords, I was like, oh, I'm glad nobody told me this sooner, because I know my mom would have been like, gangueros. Like, we don't need to talk about those gangueros.
Right.
And I'm like, I hate that I can't even have expected them to do better because there's a history of overvaluing whiteness and devaluing our rebellion, our revolutions, our anything that we go against whiteness is viewed as not safe, not good, not personally and career-wise.
Yeah, no, 100%. Whenever we stand up for ourselves or organize, we're called gangs, you know, while other people are called like political parties, you know what I mean? Or whatever it might be. So I definitely love this perspective, this conversation. So I want to get back in the book though. But you talk about something that I feel like is incredibly common, but not spoken about enough. And that's the idea of imposter syndrome. Yeah. And you going to a school like Vanderbilt, which obviously it doesn't have many people of color going to it. You know, that my girlfriend, I relate to this because we've had a conversation. She's in law school right now, and she's one of a few women of color in her classes. And she goes through this feeling of sometimes like she doesn't belong there, not good enough, you know, those kinds of things. So let's kind of touch on this and kind of what you see the reasoning behind this is such a common thing for women of color specifically, because I think even as a male, we have a little bit more privilege. Even as a male, you know, of color, I still on the social totem pole am looked at a little bit higher, you know, but specifically this is a bit of a phenomenon when it comes to women of color. And why do you think so?
I think because of how we're socialized. Like, my first husband, when my mom found out that he served his home plate, she was shocked. She was like, "Oh, míralo!" Like it was like a fascination. The few times that I've been praised at home when I lived back at home, more because I did laundry, I cleaned the bathroom without being asked, my room was clean. I could get on the dean's list every semester, and that went unacknowledged every semester. But I did the dishes on Friday at 5 p.m. And I was a mujer virtuosa. So I think it's the socialization. Like we are praised for certain things. We are not praised for other things. And then we enter elite spaces that aren't, you know, like the cooking championship. And it feels like you shouldn't be there. Like it feels like everything that's happening good, you should just be humble about it. Nobody likes a woman that's smart and knows it.
You'll never find a man if you're too smart, or you make more money than him or something like that.
Yeah, I have been told a los hombres no les gustan las mujeres que leen. Men don't like women who read. I've been told that. So how do you not carry that to those spaces when you start hearing that messaging from whiteness? Because whiteness reinforces that. it's like the double-edged sword. Like you felt it at home and now you're entering this space and you feel it to a level that's systemic. It's not just your mommy praising you for strictly female quote unquote duties. It's like everybody wondering, how did you even end up in this master's program? That's so elite.
Right. And they'll try and find excuses for why you are there, or or you're labeled as, oh wow, you're like one of the good ones then. You know what I mean? Like I've heard things like that happen, like, oh wow, he's so well spoken. And it's like that, okay, so that there's obvious like stereotypes and racial undertones to what you're saying, that you're surprised that I can compose myself and articulate my thoughts in a way that's like acceptable to you. And it's funny how so much of that stuff is just allowed and swept under the rug and nobody really bats an eye about it, you know?
Yeah. And it's so like, where do you go when you hear something like that at your job? Nowhere. Like there is no protocol for it. I was working at Neiman Marcus on the floor when my manager said, it was the outlet store in Dolphin Mall in Miami. And my manager said, he was a white man, a gay white man. And he said, you're so different than all the other, and they were all Latinas on the floor. He said, you're so different than all of them. You're just so much smarter. Wow. And I couldn't, where do you go? Like, the manager just told me that. Like, where do I go from here?
Absolutely. If you don't have an HR person that's educated on like the undertones and the real meaning of that stuff, most people are going to brush, oh, but that's not a big deal. He was just complimenting you. You know, they don't understand how what he's actually saying and how, you know, detrimental it is to your own confidence and your own identity.
Yeah, because you want to be in community with someone, and I didn't want to be in community with this white manager. Right. So then I'm like, this makes me, you have now selected me as different. And so that has separated me from my people. And unfortunately, I think a lot of us, because we are taught to overvalue whiteness, and again, why we're not taught all our figures that we should know about, a lot of us are like, yes, I did it. And now I too can get a promotion because I'm different than them. And then I will nurture whoever's different than them too. And then we continue the same cycle without them even, like they haven't even told us to become their soldiers for it. We have now taken the responsibility to go ahead and perpetuate all that.
Right. Because we're like almost being tricked into taking pride with the fact that we are different, you know? It's just crazy. It really is just like a mind, you know, that is just like purposely done, obviously. I mean, the last thing I want to ask you about that I found really fascinating was the conversation of internalized racism. So break that down a little bit. There's a lot of ways to come at it. I don't know where to start, which part. I mean, you talk about how you see yourself and your community more clearly, you know, and even I think how you see yourself in your own community, you know, because I think that I've struggled with this as well, where I think when I was younger, I was pushed away a little bit by like my cousins back home. I talk about this on my podcast because they would call me a gringo because I didn't speak proper Spanish. You know what I mean? My Spanish was broken and I was too Americanized for them, you know? So it almost felt like I didn't have a home, and it almost made me kind of revolt against my own culture, I think, to a degree in my mind, you know, that, okay, I'm going to be the furthest thing from you guys then if that's how you feel about me. So that's, I think, a good example of internalized racism that I've experienced in my life. So I think kind of if you want to touch on from that perspective.
I think for me, the way that I specifically wrote about it, it's I do look more indigenous. Like, trust me, I have tried to not. It's taken me years to accept it. I like bought turquoise contacts. Like I tried. I thought you can alter your appearance. And it never worked. And so the way that I experienced it in our communities, because I didn't leave our communities till I was in my late 20s. That's when I started grad school. So I experienced like mejorar la raza comments. Like I experienced get out of the sun comments. I experienced light-skinned Latinx dating me on dares from their friends. Like all of that. It is so embedded that I even knew my first ex-husband. I knew that if I picked a white guy, they would be okay with it. Wow. And I wanted to get out of the house so bad that I picked a white guy. So it's so insidious, and it's like it's in everyday interactions. That's the thing that I've been talking about. Like, we are taught to overvalue whiteness, and then the ways that looks is that we undervalue brownness and blackness at every turn.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're oftentimes, like, whether it's by design by ourselves, but also obviously outside sources, we're told that there's only one way to be Latin, right? Like that. And it's ignoring just the beautiful, diverse history that Latinos have. You know, it's just this interesting thing when we grow up. It's like, oh, sorry, there's only one way to be so. And if you don't fit into that box, sorry, like, you know, go off and find something else for yourself. And there's a lot of like self-hatred that ends up brewing, I feel like, because of that.
Yeah. Or even last names. I watched a video of a Guatemalan president in the 70s say his last name for like 3 minutes. Like he was like, I forget what his name was, but he started, let's say, Alfredo, Manuel, Rodriguez, Alcaraz, and like just kept going and going for 3 minutes. And I remember being like, what's happening? Yeah. And the teacher said, oh, he's tracing his lineage to Spain. Like he's making sure that you know that he is of Spanish descent. Right. Like that's fascinating. Why? Fascinating. Yeah. Fascinating. And we've all internalized it. And that's why the Rosalia pick pisses me off.
Right. No, I mean, and that makes perfect sense. And honestly, what you're bringing up with me, with like, my last name is Ramos, but like white people would say Ramos, and I wouldn't correct them for the longest time. You know what I mean? It was just kind of like, but now I take pride and be like, no, you have, like, this is how you properly pronounce it. I correct people. I properly pronounce, because there's something beautiful about rolling my R to say my last name. You know what I mean? But like, it took a long time for me to find that internal like love for myself and where I come from, you know? And I mean, obviously so many of us struggle with that, being in a world that really kind of makes us feel lesser than. Yeah.
Yeah. And I hope that a book like this gives people just courage. Right. Courage to do whatever it means. Because as a people, we have been told what to do for far too long. Right. So if you read a book like this and you decide to do this minor tweak in the way that you address a room of people and you say Latinx instead of Latino, then I think that's a win. But you have to start somewhere. Just disrupt the expectations.
No, I love that. I love that. And it's all about growth. I think we're all learning and we're all kind of correcting past mistakes, past trauma, all of the above. And these new ideas, or ideas that are new to us, aren't necessarily wrong because we've never heard them before. We have to accept that a lot of it is a part of growth and correcting the mistakes of previous generations. And that's okay, you know? Yeah. Which I love. Okay, so I mean, listen, I appreciate the conversation. I love everything we're talking about. I could talk to you for like another 4 hours about this, but where can people follow you? I know the book is out everywhere right now. Where can people follow you on social media if they want to keep up with everything you're doing?
Yeah, I'm at Priscadorcas everywhere. So just look for it. I think I'm the real Priscadorcas on TikTok, but honestly, don't even bother because I'm old. I'm an older millennial and I'm embarrassed that I'm even on the app. Yeah. But here we are.
Yeah, same. I'm embarrassed when I log out to TikTok and I see that people have found me on there because it's just not, it's not quality. You know, I haven't cracked that one yet. I think I might be a little bit too old for it, but it's okay. Well, listen, please, guys, it's been amazing getting to meet you, and thanks again for hopping on the show. Hopefully we can get to do this again sometime.
Likewise. Thank you.
Okay, great. Man, big thank you to my guest this week, Prisca, for hopping on. Make sure you go pick up her book, For Brown Girls with Sharp Edges and Tender Hearts. I actually just picked up a copy for my girlfriend. She absolutely loved it, so I definitely highly recommend that. Now, before we get out of here, though, let's end on some positivity, of course, in the form of a positive quote. Now, this one only felt fitting, especially as Major League Baseball actually celebrated Roberto Clemente Day this last week, that we start things off for Hispanic Heritage Month with a quote from him. Now, this is just a super impactful quote that just shows you the mindset of this man. And he says, "I am from the poor people. I represent the poor people. I like workers. I like people that suffer because these people have a different approach to life from the people that have everything and don't know what suffering is." And I love this quote. And man, it's easy in this life to sometimes think, why do bad things keep happening to me? Or watching as it feels like other people around you are having things come to them so easily and you're just struggling to make things happen, to make things work. And listen, I've lived my life feeling that way for as long as I can remember, feeling like I was always the underdog, but at the end of the day, now that I sit here in a bit more of a comfortable position and life is a little bit easier for me, I'm grateful for those hardships, for those moments, because they've built the tenacity and character that I have in myself to stick through when times get rough. When things aren't going my way, I figure out somehow, some way, the path that makes something happen for myself. And I don't think I would have been able to kind of have that if I didn't kind of have these reps, have these days, have these years of my life that were extremely difficult. They have definitely created a much stronger human being and a much more evolved human being who doesn't allow any sort of challenge to stop him from doing what he has his mind set out on. And I want you to remember that, all of these sort of painful moments that you're going through in your life, all these struggles that you're going through on your path to achieving what it is that you want out of this life, they are just building up the character and that tenacity that you're going to need to kick life's ass one of these days. So just keep that in mind and keep on pushing. And with that said, thank y'all so much for tuning into another episode. I appreciate all the love. I will catch y'all next week. Until then, stay safe. I'll talk to you then. Peace.